We have a new in-gathering hymn and a new month. This morning, our hymn is number 347 by Jim Scott, Gather the Spirit. I invite you to rise with me and with the choir, and we'll sing together, Gather the Spirit.
Good morning. Whether you're here in person, joining us online, or watching later on YouTube, welcome to First Parish in Concord. I'm Reverend Seth Carrier-Ladd, your interim senior minister. My pronouns are he, him. Joining me in leading our service this morning is Reverend Liz Weber, our Minister for Congregational Life, Reverend Amy Friedman, our Minister of Religious Education, and we are welcoming a guest preacher this morning, C.B. Beal, who will be joining us here virtually, right here behind me. Arkady, can we spotlight C.B. so that we can have C.B. show up? Is that doable? Okay. CB needs to be showing up here right now. Okay, let's pin CB. Because we don't want you all to see CB before we get started. I think CB is pinned up here, but I could be wrong. So this is part of our new technology exploration. Hey, there's CB. Yay. All right. So there we go. This is CB. CB, welcome. A little bit about CB. CB, whose pronouns are they, them, theirs, is a UU religious and social justice educator who specializes in facilitating learning experiences that involve issues of marginalization, oppression, and privilege. Before becoming a full-time consultant, they were the full-time director of religious education at the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence for 16 years. As it just so happens, that's my home congregation, and yes, we did overlap a little. CB has a Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary and is the recipient of the UUA's Angus H. McLean Award for Excellence in Religious Education in 2019. So CB, CB's gone. We're so glad to have you joining us this morning. If you're online, please feel welcome to participate fully in the chat. If you're here in person and have questions about accessibility or the building, please see our ushers or any worship leader. Our COVID precautions are that we mask at all times in this space, the sanctuary, and that masks, unless you're up here speaking like I am, and that masks are optional elsewhere in the building. We also encourage social distancing as you wish and use air filters and ventilation to improve air quality. I'm gonna have to figure out a different way to hold my papers next time we do this. I invite everyone present now. You don't need to turn. We're going to look at that camera. So we're going to stand. We don't mean to stand. Just wave, right? Just wave. Wave to the folks who are joining us online. Hi, everybody on Zoom. All right. However you are joining us this morning, thank you for coming. We're glad that you're here.
As we begin our service, I want to invite you to stick around after we end our service. This morning, we have a couple different ways you can stay involved. We have the worship sharing circle, which is a space for some small group interaction, talking about how the service is resonating with your life. That will be either via link on Zoom or downstairs in the Brooks room. If you would like a less structured way to mingle with folks, we have coffee hour either in breakout rooms on Zoom or downstairs in the parish hall. And if you are here in person and you could benefit from an elevator, we are thrilled to let you know that the elevator is back in service. We are so sorry, and we, with you, were so frustrated that it took so long. But we celebrate that it is back in service, and we welcome everybody who would benefit from that to use it freely and joyfully. We can look ahead to next weekend. Come to church all weekend. On Saturday morning is the church-wide retreat. That's part spiritual nourishment and part beginning to build our congregational covenant together. We would love to see you there here in person or on Zoom. Please register via FP Weekly. If you can't make it to the retreat, but you want to be involved in building the covenant from the ground up, we'll have a couple of workshops after church, so during coffee hour next Sunday, both online and in person. You can see CC King or myself about either of those events. Other than that, all announcements are now on paper and will be online. They will be online. They're not yet, but will be online also. So you can check out any events that are coming up here. You've got dates, you've got contact people. If you want to see how to get there online or full information, that's when you go to FP Weekly, which also has sweet messages from Seth or myself or Paul or Amy, depending on the week. If you would have an event coming up and you would like to list it, there's a form to submit an event to our Sunday announcements. That form is on the website, and there's a link to it in FP Weekly. Let's settle in together. I invite you to take a breath, give a little wiggle, or take a little stretch, and enjoy our centering music. Thank you, David.
There we go. This new technology is such a wonderful opportunity for me to practice being imperfect. I love it. Good morning. Our call to worship this morning are words by Donna Markova. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit.
First. All the way up there. Perfect. Do you want to blow it out? I'll hold it for you. Blessing the air, in case you're wondering, and also fire prevention, both important. Will you please join us in the words printed in your order of service? O flame of our faith, open our hearts. Our opening hymn this morning is number 318, We Would Be One.
All righty. The story this morning is called Spork, and it is from the original. It's a retelling from the original book Spork by Kyle McClear. And because I'm not telling it as a picture book, I want to tell you about the characters that are in this book. There's Spork, Spork's parents, the fork and spoon, and various other cutlery. Later in the story, a toddler will come upon the scene quite suddenly. Spork was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both and also neither. Spork had two parents who both thought that Spork was perfectly sporky, but Spork stuck out. In the kitchen, forks were forks and spoons were spoons. Cutlery customs were closely followed. Mixing was uncommon. The forks and the spoons knew who they were and what they were for. Now, naturally, there were rule breakers, knives who loved chopsticks and tongs who married forks, but such families were unusual. Spork spent most of their time tucked in the bottom corner of the back drawer in the kitchen counter. You know the drawer, we all have it. It's the one with the 5 corn-on-the-cob forks and the 3 plastic straws in the old can opener that we keep around because even though it sticks, the other one sometimes goes missing. When Spork came out of the drawer to sit on the countertop, the other utensils would say hi and they'd move on. Some of them would forget that they had met Spork many times before, and some would ignore Spork completely or ask intrusive questions. Well, one day after the billionth time Spork was asked, "Have you been coming here long?" And "What are you anyway?" And "Has your body always been like that?" And the zillionth time Spork was passed over when the table was being set, Spork sighed and thought, it must be easier to just be a single thing. And Spork decided to pick just one thing to be. Now, Spork thought to start by fixing their head, and they put on a bowler hat to try to look more spoonish, but the forks thought that Spork was too round. Then Spork made a paper crown to look more forkish, but the spoons thought Spork was too pointy. Spork wondered if there were other lonely creatures out there with no matching kind, who never got chosen to be at the table, who didn't really belong. They wondered if there was an egg beater, rolling pin, or a garlic press ice cream scoop, or a spatula teapot. But Spork never met them. At dinner time, Spork watched from the counter while the spoons played pea hockey and skillfully balanced boiled eggs. Spork sat off to the side while the forks raked fancy patterns in mashed potatoes and twirled noodles around in complicated circles like rhythmic gymnastics. And at the end of this and every other meal, Spork looked on while the others enjoyed a fabulous dip in the pool. Why, there was even bubbles and a spongy massage. But Spork was there watching from the counter and then shuffled back to their drawer. But then one day, a messy thing arrived. This messy thing had obviously never heard of cutlery customs or table manners. It had its way with the spaghetti. It giggled to see the peas bounce and spread across the floor in great patterns of escape. No cutlery customs at all. This messy thing smeared and spilled and flung and clumped and dripped without a care. "Oh, wait," said the forks, but the messy thing did not wait. Fling! "Oh, careful," said the spoons, but the messy thing was not careful. Smear! "Oh, help," said the forks, while the messy thing continued to slop and splatter. "Quick," said the spoons. They didn't know what to do with this messy thing. Now, a fork may be good for poking and picking, and a spoon may be fine for scooping and stirring. But this messy thing with its slurpy and clumpy, half-finished food bits needed something else, something that could do all sorts of things at once, something flexible and easy to hold, something that was neither spoon nor fork, but a bit of both and also neither. The utensils looked around and they saw Spork and they gasped and immediately felt this very complicated mixture of excitement and relief and some embarrassment. And that is the moment when Spork leapt off the countertop, over the cutlery drawer, and landed on the high chair. Doo-doo-doo! The messy thing saw Spork, and immediately it made gurgling noises, and its eyes got big. It grabbed Spork and held Spork motionless. Then it tapped Spork up and down and let out a very cheerful eek. Now, this is the story of how Spork finally and happily found their way to the table. And the cutlery, having realized the mistake was actually theirs all along, immediately had a meeting and voted unanimously to dismantle and completely reconstruct the kitchen and the kitchen drawers. They asked Spork what Spork needed and others. They listened. They bore witness to lives they had previously not understood or maybe even noticed. In the end, there was a space for Spork and a proper space for the 5 corn-on-the-cob forks and 3 plastic straws and the old can opener that sticks. They built new spaces that would properly fit the egg beater rolling pin, the garlic press ice cream scoop, and the spatula teapot. They learned about Spork before Spork had made themselves helpful. They just learned about Spork, and they began to notice when they were unfriendly. They started to interrupt one another if someone asked an intrusive or rude question. They stopped asking Spork and their friends to prove the reality of their experience, and they simply started learning about their experience. Well, as they did these things, they learned more about themselves than what they thought they already knew. Why they found out there's a whole subgroup of forks and spoons that would really much rather play board games than spend so much time in the pool. Yeah, and some knives that wanted to hang out in the garage with the hatchets. They had been so busy thinking that they knew who they were. It hadn't occurred to them they were already so many things at one time. When they finished the kitchen remodel, they left a couple of empty spaces too, spaces that were constructed with flexibility for whomever came next. The table was for all, so the organization had to be as well. And they all agreed that Spork was perfectly sporky, just a little bit round, just a little bit pointy, just right. Thank you for listening to my story today.
Wonderful wisdom story. Little RE has already started. It's down in the Milldam Nursery School. And so if there are any parents of preschoolers or kindergartners who would like to head down there now, you may. I'd like to invite our RE guides to come forward first, because I'd like you to see these wonderful volunteers that we have for our winter term. This is actually their final Sunday, but I'm so grateful for all of their leadership. And I'd like to invite our 1st through 5th graders to head up to Soul Matters, and then our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders are heading to Crossing Paths. Thank you. Let's join together in song.
Our reading this morning are words from James Baldwin. For nothing is fixed. Forever and forever and forever, it is not fixed. The earth is always shifting. The light is always changing. The sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born. And we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails. Lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the lights go out. That was amazing. I am one of those who has spent what is still for some a pandemic at home, and there is nothing that makes me a little bit verklempt than UU choir singing with masks, and absolute glory. Thank you. I would like to invite you to pause for just a minute. Take a breath. Feel your seat in your seat. Feel your feelings. Notice them. Give them names if you can. It can be said that Unitarian Universalists are particularly wordy people. And in fairness, look what I get to do for a living. It's a good part of it. We spend a lot of time thinking and talking about what we think is true. We think about something, decide what's right, and take positions on things. None of that was what Spork needed. As much as we UUs love to think, talk, argue, and search for truth and meaning, these activities do not build trust. They might build knowledge or awareness. They might build the kind of connection that comes from striving together with common purpose. But talking about our ideas doesn't build trust. Talking rather about our lives and having our truth received and held dear, that does. Trust is not primarily a cognitive brain-based experience. It's emotional. And I have to suggest that if we are part of a religious tradition that prides itself in and even prioritizes thinking, we have to work all the harder to build trust. In our story today, Spork had no reason to trust the utensils that were in charge, not simply because they ignored Spork, but also because they did not know or care about Spork's life until Spork had a function among them. They did not know or care to make space for Spork, what Spork was like or what they needed, what they cared about. So Spork had no feeling of connection, of care or trust with them. In dismantling and reconstructing the kitchen, the other utensils spoke with Spork and learned about Spork's life and the lives of others who are like Spork, or different from both Spork and themselves. They started following people like Spork on social media and reading books. They listened without responding. They didn't just see a problem with drawers and build a new one that was just like the first, only bigger, and be done with it. They connected with Spork in a way that meant that later on, they would not ignore Spork in another situation. They would know Spork deeply, and Spork would know them, and they would be in a trusting relationship. Spork would be able to trust them because they had made themselves trustworthy. They restructured things by changing their perspective, their behavior, and their environment. Now, in congregational life, discussions about funding and polity and the next social justice project, we spend a lot of time searching for what is right, what is best. And when we're striving to be right, we are living in our cognitive brains, which compete for rightness. And it becomes a battle. And battles are not beloved community. It's very hard to be kind when we're battling. Now, in the right circumstances, this competing for rightness, this battle, it's really necessary. We battle systemic racial oppression. We battle patriarchal and homophobic laws about policing people's bodies. We battle police misconduct, and we battle encroaching national fascism. And if arguing and battling is our most common way of interacting, it interferes in our ability to be beloved community, one with another. Now, bearing witness is different. When we bear witness to people, we must consistently notice and then set aside our thoughts and assumptions, the things that don't make sense to us because we don't have their whole picture yet. We have to recognize when what we're bearing witness to is so different from our own experience that we have to take care not to dismiss it out of hand. When we bear witness, we prioritize the story someone else wishes to tell over the questions we have as it goes along, over where we would like their story to go and how we want a happy ending, or how we mentally fill in the gaps in the story that they tell. We simply return again and again to the story they share. And we set aside again and again our own assumptions. When we can still our minds and be present with someone, I think it's then that we're able to express meaningful empathy. We can make space to say, oh, wow, that must have been so hard. Or, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry that happened. You did not deserve that. Or, that's amazing. I'm so honored you told me that. Thank you. When we tell the stories of our lives, people have the opportunity to hold space for the unveiling of more of us. And I don't mean here like chit chat about our kids' recital or a ski trip or humble bragging about a promotion, although those have important social places in our interactions, but those more meaningful stories. Stories of our struggle for survival, our curiosity about who we are and why we do what we do, our learning and growing. When we share things that are deeply meaningful to us, our perspective and our experience, and then we find that the listener has received it and believed us, we will find that person trustworthy. The person who receives and believes our experience is the person who is trustworthy. But we all too often don't experience that, do we? All too often, we experience people trying to fix us or to fix our situation, or worse, to tell us that our experience is wrong. And it's all too often we who try to fix things for others. When I was a kid growing up on a stony farm, I only knew about two genders, girl and boy. And I had two choices within girl or failed girl. Just as with boy, there was boy or failed boy. Where I lived, they called a failed girl a tomboy, and they called a failed boy a sissy or a fairy. People policed what a girl or a boy was. As I got older, I worked hard for words to describe my gender. I said, I'm a masculine of center person. I'm womanish. Or for a long time, I said, I'm a tomboy farm girl. And finally, I mashed together all the different ways I had tried to articulate what my gender was, because I wasn't just a kind of a woman. I wasn't really a woman. And I said, I'm a butch, queer, tomboy farm girl, masculine of center, womanish type person. A lot of words. But it turns out that my sexual orientation and my gender, they're both kind of queer. In the many decades since I was that child, we have developed better understanding, knowledge, and language, and now there's a very simple word for my gender. I'm non-binary. I'm genderqueer. It's a gender that does not fall into the Western cultural idea of man and woman as opposite and only. I'm trans, which means I'm across from the gender that people expect me to have as a person that's in a body we call female. Not a man, not a woman, sort of both and also neither. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. There's a term called gaslighting you may be familiar with. It means to manipulate someone into questioning their sanity. It comes from a play and a movie of the same name. And in that movie, an abusive husband attempted to make his wife think that she was mentally unwell, to question her own perceptions by, among other things, adjusting the lighting, a gas lamp, downward. And when she would say, "It's dark in here," he would say, "No, it's not." It was repeated and repeated until she questioned her very perception of her eyes, which could otherwise see. Now, the goal of gaslighting is to get someone to disbelieve their own experience and replace it with someone else's. It's not about ideas. And it's not to discuss or persuade someone to feel or think differently, but to manipulate them into first not trusting their own experiences and then replacing them with the experience of someone else. Now, this happens all too often in our personal and religious lives. People who are like Spork, people who do not experience their gender in the same way as broader society tells them they're supposed to. These people are gaslit in our society every single day. People say, "There's no such thing as trans. There's no such thing as non-binary. I've never heard that 10,000 years people have been men and women." When you follow the reasoning, it usually boils down to some version of, "I'm not non-binary. It doesn't make sense to me, so I don't believe you." Now, this experience of having people replace their own perspective and perception and not believing someone else because of it is more familiar than it may seem at first. Those of us who are survivors of dysfunctional families and abuse, those of us who are survivors of or have illnesses like fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue that other people told us we didn't have, we've experienced being surrounded by people who tell us that we're wrong or broken. There's those of us who were told we were bad and lazy when it turned out that we were simply neurodiverse, but nobody knew what it was back then. We have experienced people tell us that our perceptions of our experience are not valid because it differs from someone else's. Therefore, it must be all in our heads, made up. Some version of, "I don't have that. I've never heard of that. I don't believe you." And it's even more broadly true for those of us who are survivors of and live with pervasive sexism, racism, homophobia, ableism. "I've never seen that oppression like you described. It's not that bad. I don't believe you." And I must acknowledge that I have been on both sides of this story. I have been the person whose reality is challenged by someone else who refuses to bear witness to my life. And I have been the person who uses my own reality to judge others. When I come back in 3 weeks, I will share some of the ways I am my very own cautionary tale. But for right now, this. I come from about 400 years of Puritan New Englanders, from people with names like Harbottle Grim Scott. My family's like Puritans are us. And regardless of your personal family history, if you're you're deeply bound up in this history as well. I come from generations of people who, when someone dies, says, "Well, that's too bad, got to get on with it, it's work to do." I come from people for whom grieving is private and internal and set aside as quickly as possible. And empathy, if even offered by the other Puritans, who will bring a casserole, but maybe not so much the empathy. Empathy is just shaken off. Feelings are meant to be things that flash past, darting like a bird that never lands. In our own judgment, we are taught, is most likely right. We are raised to believe that we always know best. I grew up knowing only 3 feeling words. Mad, sad, and what was the other one again? Oh yeah, mad. Now, personally, I think that this also means that since I come from a long line of people who, because we were never taught what it is to deeply experience what we're experiencing, our Puritan roots in our family cultures have led us sometimes to gaslight even ourselves. We were never helped to find words for our gender. We were never supported to fully experience grief or so many other big emotions, or even to learn the words for the more finely tuned ones. So much of our entire broad culture prioritizes what we should be and how we should be and what we should feel over learning who we actually are. And if we weren't taught how to notice, honor, and bear our own feelings, our experiences of grief, gender, or otherwise, how could we possibly bear witness to others? How on earth can we express meaningful empathy? So many of us were never taught how to sit with other people's feelings, with their stories, to simply be present. Now, some of us, realizing that what our families had taught us about life was less helpful than they had thought, or that our coping mechanisms that had kept all those feelings at bay had accidentally turned into a drug or alcohol problem. Some of us joined support groups or recovery groups. Others of us joined covenant groups and small group ministry. We may have been confused and flummoxed when we first entered those rooms and found that people simply sat quietly listening while someone else talked. And they just went on and on sometimes. Personally, I started out being judgmental of other people taking up so much time talking about themselves. Oh my goodness, what an ego-driven thing, I thought. Wow, sure is all about me in here. I had been taught that anything about me was too much. Others of us took to it like fish to water. Finally, I can talk without being interrupted, corrected, or scolded. What a relief. Over time, I realized that this is how humans grow, connect, and develop trust in relationship. This is a core part of beloved community, that we learn to listen deeply, and we learn that other people will listen to us deeply. Will let us share at our own pace, will believe what we say about our experience, which is different from what we believe or what we think, but what we have experienced with our bodies. And that these folks will care for us even when we find it hard to care for ourselves. In beloved community, we learn that people will maintain our confidences and protect our autonomy and make space for us to be different. Will join with us in changing the broader spaces around us to make them more flexible and responsive spaces and processes of our daily lives. For some of us, it is the absolute opposite of how we grew up. And even now, late in life, we are learning to notice and tell our truth and learn to bear witness to others' truth at the same time. In small group ministry and covenant groups, recovery or therapy groups, so many of us have learned to simply listen, to suspend judgment, to notice and dismiss, or at least notice and check out our assumptions. As we got going, we start finding ourselves doing it elsewhere, bearing witness to people. We started noticing and resisting the impulse to be right, or to tell someone what to do, or to fix it for them, to make it be over with. Resisting the impulse to do anything that would move this big ball of feelings away from us. We bore witness to friends, we bore witness to colleagues. We sat and held space for people after tragedy. We learned how to be present with someone's feelings without taking them in, to be empathetic without drowning in someone else's emotion. Next thing you know, we're bearing witness willy-nilly all over the place. In the supermarket, just when it became clear that we were going to have a pandemic, it was going to be a big deal, and I and hundreds of others were doing a big stock up on staples. I came upon a man in his mid-80s. He had that bent, gnarled, but stalwart posture that he shares with my dad. And he stood clearly confused, but determined in the soup aisle. There's a lot of soup in the soup aisle. I paused and I said, as people were rushing past, "Are you okay? Can I help?" He asked me if I knew where the mushroom soup was. I said, "There's a few different brands." Did he know which one he wanted? He told me he didn't really know. His wife always cooked, and he didn't know what to get now that she'd died. I stood there for 10 minutes, and I listened to him talk about his wife and her cooking, and how confusing the grocery store is, and how he regretted never going with her to shop. It had always been his wife's job, and he regretted that as well. In the end, we identified the kind of soup she made, and I helped him choose two to try. But mushroom soup wasn't what he needed that day. He had to buy it, sure. We all had to buy food and toilet paper and such. But what he needed was for someone to see him, to bear witness to a way his life had completely changed, to how he was bereft and didn't know how to move forward. It was an honor to stand there with him in that aisle. Willy-nilly, I tell you. When we are present, simply present with someone, we open ourselves and them up to all manner of possibilities. And when we try not to control what those possibilities are or the outcome, but to simply let it happen, miracles of connection, of trust, are what will happen. And it is nothing like what we expect, and so much more beautiful. Amen. Blessed be, and may it be so because we make it so.
At this time in our service, we come into a time of love and care and prayer for one another. This week, we hold in prayer Gib Metcalf's mother. Hope, at age 101, has been diagnosed with shingles. And so we pray for her treatment to help her recover, to ease her pain, and bring her back on the road to wellness, to her baseline. I also want to continue to hold in prayer Peggy Gallo and all of you who knew her. Peggy died in January, and we will gather to remember her on Thursday this week, right here in the sanctuary and online. She was such a stalwart of this church. Her memory is a blessing. May we live into it well. Who else is on your heart and in your mind? I invite you to call their name aloud now. And let's sing together. Friends, will you pray with me? Spirit of love, show us how to love. Help us to stay in tune with our feelings and our bodies, our joy and sadness, our solidity and our pain, and everywhere in between, everywhere that is a little bit of both. Help us to stay open and willing so that we may build trust through all the ways that we connect with each other, our heads and our hearts and our spirits. Let us bear witness to each other. Let us truly, truly listen. Let us receive and believe one another's experiences. God, help us deepen into our own and one another's true experiences. Deepen into who we are in the fullness of our identities with all of the parts of ourselves. Let us deepen into where we are, the fullness of our lives, with all of the highs and lows and in between. And let us deepen into why we are, in the fullness of beloved community, with all of our capacity for love and liberation. Show us how to love. And may our opening make it so that we may live into the miracle of love and connection that is our birthright as human beings. Blessed be and amen. Let us linger in this silence and stillness.
The mission of this church is threefold: to build community, deepen spiritually, and work for justice. At this time in our service, we offer a reflection on the ways in which our actions can shape the world as individuals and as a community. We are called to act in ways that support and hold beloved community for the good of the whole, both within and beyond these walls. Sometimes this requires sacrifice, sometimes it requires courage, and always it requires love. I'd like to now invite forward Tony Rodriguez, the Executive Director of Kino Border Initiatives, so he can share more about the good work they are doing. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Seth. I am Tony Rodriguez. I am not the Executive Director.
I apologize.
There's no problem.
I've been confirmed with Paul, so we got that wrong.
I'm representing Immigration Justice Task Force, and I'm here to speak to you about the Kino Initiative. The Kino Border Initiative began operations in 2008 in the city of Nogales, Mexico. The Comedor, a very rustic soup kitchen, stood less than 200 yards from the U.S. border. By the time I visited the Comedor in 2014, it was serving 2 meals a day, 7 days a week, to some 50 migrants, men and women, at each sitting. I had told the story of one at another sack candle lighting. One story continues to tell the story of the Comedor's visitors today. 2 days before I met one, he had been picked up by the Border Patrol in the desert after he had sprained his ankle. In less than 48 hours, he had been dropped back to Nogales at 3 a.m. together with dozens more by the Border Patrol. This practice continues to this day. This practice does not go unnoticed by the gangs and drug cartels, endangering migrants, leaving them vulnerable to exploitation. As Juan continued to devour his meal at the comedor, he told me he was waiting for his ankle to heal before he would try again to cross the desert. He must have known that every day an average of 3 migrants, and he continues, die while trying to get to El Norte, the promised land. Since my visit in 2014, Kino has expanded its services, serving close to 60,000 meals a year. The migrants receive, much like in 2014, medical attention for a myriad of injuries, clothing and toiletries, plus the much needed kind words of support by the staff and the ever-present volunteers. They also get the opportunity to listen to legal orientations where they learn of such incomprehensible policies like the arcane Title 42 Public Health Code, a procedure that does not count as a formal deportation, giving the Border Patrol the right to keep them out of the U.S. or apply for asylum. A separate facility, Nazareth House, provides life-saving shelter for migrant women and children, also part of the Kino initiative. With a capacity of 170 beds, several thousand women and children have been sheltered in 2022. I light this candle in honor of the staff and all the volunteers at the Kino project, and for all the asylum seekers waiting still on the other side of the border. Thank you very much. Thank you, Seth.
Sorry. Thank you, Tony. We will now receive this morning's offering, which will split between the work of the church and Kino Border initiatives. Please give generously.
I'd like to invite you to sing again. Please gather your Singing the Journey book and turn to hymn number 1012, When I Am Frightened.
Assure me
Friends, this morning we have received an invitation into a different way of being in the world. I hope that we can work to embrace and accept and live into the invitation that has been offered us this morning. And part of the way you can do that is by showing up again on the 26th for the service that CB will lead, and then for the workshop that CB is going to lead for us on Saturday, March 11th. Also hope you show up before that too, but just FYI. All right. Let us now face our friends on camera right there and say our benediction. Go out into the world in peace. Have courage. Hold on to what is good. Return to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Go and be blessed. Be a blessing. Amen.